back to Cindy's Library. I am Cindy, and today I'm going to talk about what I read for the second half of the month of June. So, first off, I finished the Iliad, believe it or not. Well, I'm not sorry that I did. I am sorry that it was not an enjoyable experience. Was very tempted to DNF it, but I made it through. And I have a full blog about all of my adventures doing that. So, something of a, well, totally different direction, I read The Next Lord Peter Wimsey, Strong Poison by Dorothy Sayers. In this one, we get to meet Harriet Vane. She seems to be a rather modern woman, has had an interesting life to say the least, including living with an author and being an author herself. And unfortunately, the guy she was with, well, they broke up. He wanted to get back together. She said no. And shortly thereafter, he dies. At first, they don't think too much of it. I mean, he did have a very weak heart. But more and more evidence points to him having been poisoned, and Harriet had the best chance to do that based on all of the evidence that the police have. Does Lord Peter Wimsey believe it? No, he does not. So he decides he's going to get involved and find out who the real murderer is. And along the way, well, he gets involved because he's interested in Harriet Vane. And the more he goes through this experience, the more interested he gets. Although he does show another side of himself. That is true. But he definitely is very interested in Miss Harriet Vane's. Let's see. Oh, and we also have Miss Clemson from the Cattery. She gets sent on direct assignment to find out more information, since there is an aunt or maybe a great aunt involved in everything too. Harriet's kind of ex, his cousins, well, he has a cousin, and both of them are related to this great aunt, who may or may not have bequeathed some money to them in her will. So Mrs. Clemson gets involved to investigate that, and she ends up conducting a seance, which is quite hilarious the way she does it. So that is probably one of the most memorable parts of this book, aside from the whole Peter Harriet thing getting started, which is good because Peter could use someone like Harriet in his life, even though Harriet is obviously not in a good position to do anything at the moment. But we've got many Peter Wimsey books ahead of us, so never fear as far as that goes. Oh, let's see, what else? The Temple Alley Summer by Sachiko Kashiwaba. This is a book that was Uh, well, it's originally in Japanese author. Was really struck by it. It is about a boy who is up in the middle of the night and he sees a girl in a white kimono basically leaving his house. And the next day he ends up at school and he sees that girl there, dressed fairly normally and acting fairly normally. He's the only one who remembers that she's never been there before. Everyone else, they think she has been there all school year at least. The fact that she grew up in his neighborhood. And the more he investigates his neighborhood and even his grandfather, who has recently passed away, and that part is quite sweet. But the more he investigates, the more interesting things he discovers about his neighborhood, about where he lives, about his family, and about this girl. Very touching. Of course, there are some grown-ups in the neighborhood, an old woman in particular, um, some people from the neighborhood association basically, who don't want him to find out things about his neighborhood, which makes things interesting. And when we finally learn out everything that's going on, you can understand that it's a lot more complicated. And in between, there's told a story, an interesting story. I quite enjoyed it. Don't know if this would be for everyone, but well, it has some supernatural elements. None of it really felt scary. So there's also The Secret of the Blue Glass by Tomiko Inui. And this one, it is a story. The preface seems to be by a boy who lived next door to the house where most of the events, well, many of the events in the story happen. He never shows up again, which is interesting. But regardless, apparently he was told this story by his next door neighbors. In any case, 1920s Japan, a boy, he has a British lady as his teacher, but she has to go away. Before she does, she gives him a basket in which there are two tiny people, and he is charged with helping them and protecting them. And he does. He finds a safe place in his house where they can be, where hardly anyone goes, and they can easily hide if anyone ever does come in. So all of that is good. And the other part of taking care of them is filling up a little blue glass bowl every day with milk for them, which he does, and his sister does, and his friend that he ends up marrying does, and then his three children one by one do. And it's the turn of his young daughter, who is the youngest of the three children. It is World War II, and at first life goes on mostly as normal, But as time goes on, that changes. You have the military intruding more and more into everyday life, and being more militaristic at school. Second boy becomes very much that way. The father gets arrested for having pro-Western ideas, and the danger's coming closer and closer to Japan, not just for little people, but for everyone. And milk itself is becoming harder and harder to get. So eventually, the little girl is evacuated to the countryside, and her health isn't great. So instead of being evacuated with most of her schoolmates, she is evacuated to a great aunt and her daughter, I believe. Something like that in the countryside. And so she gets evacuated there and takes the little people with her. But her troubles, their troubles, are not over, although they certainly have some adventures there in the countryside as well. I didn't like this as much as the Temple Alley Summer, and I'm not quite sure why. Maybe it's just the sad subject matter. In Temple Alley Summer does have its own sad subject matter, but The Secret of the Blue Glass, I think, hits home a bit more. Maybe that's it. Anyway, and after that, I also finished Eliza, The Life and Faith of Eliza R. Snow by Lynn Davidson and Jill Mulvay Derr. Eliza R. Snow is one of the most prominent women in the first years of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She was there in Kirtland. I think she joined around 1834 or thereabouts to the church with at least part of her family. She went to Missouri, went through all of that and the troubles there. She went to Nauvoo and had a wonderful period of time there. She was a polygamous wife of Joseph Smith, although in her case it seems to have been more financial and economic support than anything else. And then Brigham Young after Joseph Smith's death, and same with that. And she went west with the Saints. She was in Nauvoo. She was the first secretary of the Women's Relief Society, and she was instrumental in reforming the Relief Society and starting the Young Women's Mutual Improvement Society and the Primary Association here in Utah. Very prominent, and she was a poet, and this is a gorgeous book. Let's see if I can find some good examples. Here is one of the pages with some images here on one side, and you can see the end of one of her poems on the other side. And her poems are still known in the church today. A number of them are in the Handbook, which is wonderful. It was wonderful to read about the life of someone like Eliza R. Snow. She certainly had a lot of courage and faith to go through everything that she went through. And it's amazing how she was able to contribute, even though she never had any children. The whole church, in a way, was her family, and she did her best to support it. That's wonderful. So, the last one I finished in the month of June is The Fall of Gondolin by J.R.R. Tolkien, edited by Christopher Tolkien. And again, we have wonderful illustrations by Alan Lee. Let's see if I can find one of my favorite ones. Alan Lee is an amazing artist. Yes. Here we go. And of course, he does various sketches as well. And we've got preface and prologue and notes by Christopher Tolkien. Got some names and additional notes by Christopher Tolkien at the end. The Fall of Gondolin is the last of the three great tales from the first age of Middle-earth. And Beren and Luthien does edge it out, but this is my second favorite one. It is the story of a man named Turin. Well, it starts when he is a bit younger. His father, no, not Turin, Tuor. His father was Huor, brother of Hurin, of Turin-Turambar fame. And after leading a somewhat outlaw and wandering life, he actually meets the Vala Olmo. He's the one over all the waters of the world. Olmo sends Tuor to the hidden elven city of Gondolin to give the king there, Turgon, a message, which Tuor does, but things do not end up as he was probably hoping, sadly enough. So, yeah, I will give a full review in another video. But in the meantime, very glad I was able to get to it. And that is all that I read for the month of June. Not my best reading month, I have to admit, but I managed to save it. So there is that. So I'd love to hear what you read for the month of June. Oh, as far as Ancient Sathan, no, I did not get to King Lear again. But I did listen to Janice Heaney's translation of Beowulf, and I actually got through the Iliad. So, given that, I think that is quite sufficient. So, until next time, I hope we all stay safe and healthy. And as always, happy reading!